Welcome into One of One Sports, the only one for your original sports commentary and analysis. Look, this past weekend in the college football playoff, there were some big blowouts, and there are a few changes that need to be made to this playoff format. What are they? Let's talk about it. All right, before we get into the video, if you guys are enjoying the college football content on the channel, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. We're trying to hit now 500 subscribers before actually the end of the college basketball season. What's that going to be in April? So if you want to help me out, go ahead and subscribe. But right now we are going to be focusing, of course, on college football. And I'm sure, as most of you know, the playoff games were just on Friday and Saturday, and those last two on Saturday involving the G5 teams, James Madison and Tulane. For those who don't know, G5 stands for Group of Five and is the conferences not considered to be amongst the power conferences. That is the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the SEC. Now, you can argue the Big Ten and the SEC are above the ACC and Big 12. It's really Power 2. But the point is G5, it refers to all the conferences not in that group. So, with the two of those teams making the playoff, it has caused, a bit of controversy and people want some rule changes. So we're going to break down some simple fixes that can be made to improve the college football playoff, as well as some more sort of radical ideas that I do really want feedback on. So please, if you're going to skip ahead, don't skip ahead, watch the full video. But if you do skip ahead, I would like some input on my ideas in the back half of this video, as they're pretty out there. And then the first thing I want to say is, we'll get into the video right now. My ideal playoff right now would involve less than 12 teams. I would either want 4 teams and we just get like the power champions of the ACC, Big 12, SEC, ACC. Like, I'd be perfectly fine with that. Now, I know there's some things like, what if Notre Dame went undefeated? What if one of the power conference champions isn't good? So I know it's not perfect, but I personally like the 4-team playoff era. I like less teams. I think the regular season had even more stakes than it does now. Even though the stakes are good now, I like them to have maximized stakes. And right now they just don't, which some people are fine with. But me personally, a team like last year's Ohio State that goes 10-2, me personally, I don't want that team to be able to have a chance to win a national championship. I prefer my college football. Like, if you lose your biggest games of the year, one to the best team you play in Oregon, one to your rival, like, I think that should eliminate you. So I don't want 10-2 teams in the playoff. I would want a 4-team field, maybe a 6-team field where you get a couple at large, at most 8. That would be my ideal format. And I think right now, the way college football is structured, where you have 4 power conferences, I think that would be perfectly fine. Like, the Big Ten, you would get Indiana in because they beat Ohio State at a neutral site. They already beat Oregon. They're clearly the Big Ten representative. And then the SEC, I think Georgia would clearly be the SEC representative, having their only loss avenged the SEC championship. Texas Tech clearly out of the Big 12. Now, the ACC would have been a little dicier, but we have some stuff I think that could correct that. Now, I will say, if you wanted to add maybe 2 more spots, give a first round by a top 2, or add 4 at-large spots and have an 8-team field, I'm also okay with that. But yeah, I would prefer less than 12, but I also know that that is unrealistic. This thing makes too much money. It's probably going to grow to more teams against, in my opinion, the good of college football. I think it's bad to keep expanding. I think you continue to diminish the value of regular season games. And what is really the only sport, only popular sport, like, you look at the NBA, you look at college basketball, you look at the NFL. This college football is the only sport that had such a valuable regular season commodity. It wasn't so postseason centered. As you expand the field, that will change. You become more and more like a college basketball, like an NBA, like an NFL, where people look ahead to the playoffs instead of looking ahead, or at least what I do. And I think most college football fans, you're like, okay, when do we play our rivalry team in week 12? Or when do we play, a big opponent? Like, if you're in the SEC, Alabama, you may be looking, when do we play Auburn's or the LSU's or whoever, right? It's about these in-season, in-conference, big regular season games, not postseason football. The more you expand it, the more I think that'll change. So that's my little soapbox there. But since it is not going to change, here are some ideas to fix the current 12-team bracket, and then some radical changes that could kind of help us out as well. All right, so in this year's playoffs, there were a few problems that stood out, at least to me. So the first was, we probably don't want 2 group of 5 teams in the playoffs, so we need to address that. There was controversy about Alabama not dropping from conference championship, but BYU did. That allowed Miami to propel, so big conference championship issues. And then finally, there was some like strength of schedule stuff, head-to-head, that kind of thing. So here are the simple fixes to fix how this is done. The very first thing that needs to be done if we're going to have a selection committee 12-team process. Now, you could change this. You could go to automatic bids, automatic qualifiers, whatever you want to call it, right? The first thing, though, is you either need to pick automatic qualifiers or have defined criteria for the selection committee. And what do I mean by that? Right now, you just have a list of things that the committee bakes in, but there's no order of preference, of importance, and there's no weighting. So what I would prefer is you pick your criteria. What are we going to use? So just for example, and you could define your own things, but I would say like strength of record, like who did you beat, who did you lose to, that kind of thing needs to be baked in. And then also, your probably game control, like how much of the time are you leading, how much are you leading by, that kind of thing, your overall impressiveness, and then maybe like an analytical model to get in some of like who's the best team, who would be favored, that kind of thing, maybe baked into it a little bit as well, as we do want the best team. So for example, you could just have all those, weight them, and then each team is scored, right, by the selection committee. But right now you can't, for sometimes like 8 is ahead of 9 because, they had a harder strength of schedule, but 12's ahead of 13 because of game control, and 14's at 14 because they didn't play, but like you're just switching the criteria. We can't have that. It makes it way too subjective, way too inconsistent. So you need either defined criteria with weighting for the committee to judge, and then we can at least see, okay, where was the logic here, and it'll be consistent and it'll be easy to follow. Or yes, you can just have automatic qualifiers through defined paths in championship games, or what would likely be expanded play-in games during conference championship weekend. Either of those would solve that issue. Okay, next thing you can do is add, and many people, Nick Saban this past weekend talked about it, a top 15 rule, a top 20 rule, right? Basically a baseline you have to be ranked at to qualify for the playoffs. So even if you're a conference champion like James Madison or Duke, if you weren't in the top 15, you wouldn't get one of those spots. This is really simple and would kind of just help to eliminate the challenge of sometimes the conference championships having teams win who just aren't good enough or don't deserve to be in the playoff. This rule would help solve that. So that's a really simple one that could easily be implemented and maybe is even likely to be implemented. Then more solving or more problems we need to solve. I think conference championship rules just have a very defined rule, because it's not, sometimes you can't say, well, we didn't want to punish a team for playing the extra game. I think it's really, really simple. Just say conference championships are a reward. If you were ahead of team based off the 12 games when both teams played, you won't be punished for being rewarded with an extra game, because what you're going to do is eliminate conference championships values, which you definitely don't want to do because they bring in a ton of revenue. The SEC championship, that makes a lot of money. You do not want to eliminate these extra games that have a lot of teams interest, or a lot of fans interested, that networks paid a lot of money to broadcast. Like, you can't do that. You need them to have value. So you just make them a reward. That's what the game is. You are being rewarded for qualifying for this game. It should be all upside, no downside. Very basic rule, should be implemented immediately. And then you would get rid of all the controversy of, well, do we drop this team because they lost their championship? Just take it away. We don't need it. Now we have what I think is maybe, I think it's simple, but maybe you think it's complicated because of the way college football schedules are already so far down the road. But I do think we could implement it, and it is just a balanced scheduling rule. What I mean by that is I think every Power 4 team, there should be rules for how you have to schedule. So kind of like if you've seen the SEC's updated scheduling rules, they've now moved to 9 conference games, but you also have to play another power conference opponent. I think all the conferences should have this. I think you should have your 9 league games plus, and I'm talking power conferences here, your 9 league games plus another power conference opponent, and then you can only play one FCS school. So what this would result in is a lot of teams play one power conference opponent, one G5 opponent, one FCS school, and then all your conference opponents. That would be the common schedule. So it would eliminate, like this year, Indiana not playing any big teams out of conference, not good for the sport. We don't want that. That would be changed, and it would be less punitive for a team like Texas, who did choose to play Ohio State, got that loss, and that kind of hurt them in the end. So I think balancing by having every team play another power conference opponent, just overall more balanced scheduling will lead to easier way to rank teams, and strength of schedule, strength of record, resumes will all be more even, easier to parse and judge. So I think this would be a great change. And then the last simple fix, this is the last one, is the committee has to follow their own rules, because I was going to say a head-to-head rule where, sorry, my eye is bothering me. If you're in the same selected pool, then head-to-head has to matter. Then basically the Miami Notre Dame rule, except I remembered the committee already has that, and they were just choosing to ignore it for large swaths of the season. So the committee has to be accountable in some way to have their defined criteria like we talked about at the front end, but also to follow that, because right now they have some defined criteria, like if you are in the same selective pool, or the whatever they call their like groups of 4 teams or whatever that they're comparing, and they have the head-to-head rule. They just chose to ignore it until the last week of the season. We cannot have that because if we're doing that, I mean, it's just a terrible process. So those are my simple fixes to fix the current 12-team college football playoff. But now I want to talk about some more radical changes to college football that I think would at the very least be interesting, if not good for, or the very least interesting, maybe good for the sport. Let me know what you think, and let's get into those. The first one, and I think a lot of people are probably on board with this. I've seen Josh Pate talk about it. I've seen Joe Klatt talk about it, others as well, but I fully agree. Separate the G5 from the Power 4 and make a G5 separate playoff. So they still play each other just like FBS schools can play FCS schools, right? So we'll still get matchups between, like, Tulane and Ole Miss play this year in the regular season. They could still play, but now instead of Tulane and James Madison being in the 12-team playoff, they play in a fully funded, fully subsidized G5 playoff where they have a real chance to compete for national titles. I think there could be NIL prize money and stuff. Like, I think there can be incentives to it. It's going to be bought by television networks. It will be profitable. At least I think it would be. But either way, I think this should happen. Like you see, the FCS has a big playoffs that's broadcast on ESPN. G5 playoff would definitely be bought by networks. It would bring in more revenue. It would be a more competitive landscape for these teams, more fair, and give them a real chance to achieve a big accomplishment in a G5 national championship. I think it would be great for college football. I would love to see it happen. Okay, next up though, and this is a big one, and it's never going to happen, but I would really want it to happen, is undo the recent college football realignment. And I know it's never going to happen. The contracts are signed, and we're not, I get it, right? So do you need a comment? It's never happening. I understand that. But bring back the Pac-12. We don't need Stanford and Cal in the Atlantic Coast Conference. We would have more balanced conferences, and I'm going to break down what it would look like. So, because there's few changes besides just bringing back the Pac-12. So now the Pac-12 would have 12 teams, but in addition to that, we are going to take BYU from the Big 12, add it to the Pac-12, and we are also going to add Boise State. So the Pac-12 is going to have 14 teams. The SEC has 14 teams because you take away Oklahoma and Texas, that puts them at 14. The Big 10 at 14 once you take away the 4 teams. The Big 12, you lose the 4, that takes you down to 12, but you add, or you lose the 5, but you add Oklahoma and Texas, and we're adding SMU. So they're at 14, and then the ACC is at 14. So we have 5 power conferences, all with 14 teams. That's very important for this next step, which is a big relegation system. And this is the part I'm really excited about, want to talk about, and want to get feedback on, because the way this is work, or way this would work, is currently we have a group of 5. That means there's 5 non-power conferences to 4 power conferences. But in my realignment, we bring back the Pac-12. We have 5 power conferences of 14 teams. And what we could do is we could make each G5 conference a secondary league to the power conference. So if anyone is familiar with European soccer, you have the top leagues. You have, like, the English league is the Premier League, Spanish league is the La Liga, and like below that you have a secondary league. So for England, right, it's the first league is the Premier League. The second league, I believe, is called the Championship. Or in France, it's Ligue 1. I think it's Ligue 2, right? And the teams are worse in the second group. But what they have is that the top teams in the secondary league and the bottom teams in the primary league swap every year. So you have teams from the top league that are relegated down, and the best teams from the secondary league move up. So this way, teams like, say teams in the American right now, like North Texas or South Florida, or I don't know who else you want to say, Tulane. Like, let's go this year, North Texas, right, was really good. Say they had won the American, just hypothetically, and Oklahoma State was awful. Now, instead of like North Texas coach wanting to go to Oklahoma State would actually be relegated in this model. North Texas maybe jumps up into the Big 12, and maybe their coach stays. So I think this would be really interesting, and it's kind of already lined up. Like the Mountain West would be the secondary league to the Pac-12. The MAC would be secondary to the Big 10, and you'd have to figure out like what's Conference USA, what's the American. You maybe do some G5 realignment to make the regions line up, but for the most part, like, you could figure this out, and you could have a secondary league to each of these where the top teams would be promoted into the primary leagues. And I think this would have some really fun opportunities, because not only in this world do you have a G5 playoff, but you could have you could have one game like conference championships. Maybe not only is the conference champion championship, or sorry, not only is the conference champion going to go to the G5 playoff, but maybe they're also the one being promoted, or maybe both teams are being promoted and the bottom teams from each division in the major conferences are demoted. But you get the point. Like, there's a lot of opportunities for some high stakes games trying to get into the bigger league. This would obviously come with like a cash prize, like in the EPL, the English Premier League. They call it like the richest game in the world because there's a final qualifying game where if you win that, you're getting a ton of money and you're being promoted to Premier League. So there would be that kind of thing involved. And I think it would be really fun. And I think if we are going to separate from G5 or separate the G5, which I think is kind of coming down the tracks, there's a lot of push for it. I do think there needs to be a system in place where if they overachieve, if they're really good, if they invest and build a really good program, where some of these power conference teams like Rutgers has not been good for a while, or if Oklahoma State had continued to be really bad, like, you get the point. Some of these teams do deserve to drop below G5 teams. I think this system would allow for that and would be really fun to see. I don't think it would ever happen, but I do think it would be really fun. Of course, there is a hang-up, and that is Notre Dame. What do we do with Notre Dame? Because we have all the power conferences even at 14 teams. We have the secondary leagues, but of course, Notre Dame is going to want to stay independent. So I guess they could just stay independent as usual, but that's the one hang-up, is like we have all these even conferences, promotion, relegation, and then Notre Dame just being this outlier. But that's kind of what they are right now. So I guess that could just continue. Now moving on to another thing, which I think this is optional. This is if you wanted to do automatic qualifiers instead of the selection committee. Say we say selection committee is so bad at their job, they're so biased, they're inconsistent. Like, we just want defined paths to the playoffs. We want, designated spots. So right now the model is like SEC 4, Big 10 4, ACC 2, Big 12 2, like that's the kind of thing, right? So instead of just defining it and having it put in stone, we borrowed from European soccer for the last thing. Now I want to borrow from college basketball. And what we would do here is every year in college basketball, they have these conference challenges. So you have the SEC ACC challenge, right? Where the whole league plays each other based off the standings from last year. I think what you could do is you have these challenges. So we could have the Big 10 SEC challenge, the ACC Big 12 challenge, whatever is Pac-12. And they could kind of cycle year in and year out who's playing who, which year is going on. And obviously there's an odd team out each year. But you have these challenges, and what you do is you gather data and you basically, your record, and you could have quadrants, I think. So you get wins for like quadrant 1, which is being the top teams in the league, quadrant 2, the secondary teams, and basically you get strength of victory. It's all scored. There would be metrics for it, right? I don't want to overcomplicate it. But the general idea I have here is you would get a score based on your performance versus other leagues, and based on that power rating, it is then generated into how many teams you get for the next year. And this is kind of also, again, we're going back to European soccer. The way the Champions League works is based off how good your league is, you have a designated number of spots. So the Premier League, which is generally considered the top league in the world, gets 4 guaranteed Champions League spots. While if they were a worse league, they wouldn't get that, right? So this is kind of the concept here. So generally, like, we'd start the SEC and the Big 10 have the most, but if they don't perform in the ACC or Pac-12 or the Big 12, perform better than them, then the spots are fluid. They could change. And I think it makes it so it's not just given to these conferences, which right now the model is going to put the ACC and Big 12 at a big disadvantage. If we realign, the conferences are more balanced. No conference should really have such a huge edge. And I think getting these paths to the playoff could be better than the selection committee. And also having the fluidity to it is a fair way for all conferences. Again, I say the hang up. Notre Dame is one of them because they would have no automatic qualifier and wouldn't compete in any of these. So that's one problem. And then the other thing is rivalries, because I wouldn't want to add these challenges at the expense of rivalry games. So, if we did an SEC Big 10 challenge, like, it wouldn't necessarily work because we still need, like South Carolina still needs to play Clemson, or Florida needs to play Florida State. So there would either need to be exemptions, because back to the the balanced scheduling, you don't want all teams playing too many big games and other teams not. So the one hang up is the rivalry games being defined, and then of course Notre Dame. But yeah, that I think this was like a really fun idea. I think of realigning back to the way it was: 5 power conferences, 5 G5 conferences separated and aligned as a subdivision of the top division with built-in relegation and power ratings, and then a defined playoff. I think would be really cool to see in college football, but I am very curious for feedback on this. So if you watched this video, I thank you. Please comment, what do you think of my idea for realigning, adding relegation, promotion, and conference power ratings to college football? Do you like it? Do you think it's terrible? And if you do, let me know, what is your ideal college football playoff, or maybe you like this current format. Make sure to let me know. With that being said, that is all I have for today. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe. We will not be back until after post-Christmas, probably the weekend after, or that Monday. We're going to predict the second round of college football playoff games. Until then, I'll see you guys next time.